Noah, what's up, man?
Mr. Sam, thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
Great to have you on. I want to start by talking about something that you introduced me to. I can't remember where. It was on a podcast you did, or maybe your Substack, but it is the hunter versus farmer hypothesis. What is that, and what does it mean to be a hunter type?
Yeah. So for context, I have ADHD. I grew up, and I think a lot of people with ADHD is like, man, the classic saying is, I don't know how you can be so smart but so stupid at the same time, right? So ADHD, it's framed as this disorder, but I think most people with ADHD are like, there's something in me that feels like I'm really good at certain stuff, right? Like performing under pressure in times of chaos. I have crazy intuition. I have all of these weird skills that make me feel like maybe it's not a disorder. But we're told it's that, so we're kind of stuck at that. Like you can't get over what you believe you are. When I was in cybersecurity and I was building software, I really had to come to terms with being a high performer with ADHD. And I was looking at all these theories. I was researching all of these ADHD researchers and psychiatrists and all of the different theories around it. And one that really stuck with me was Tom Hartman and his discussion on the hunter-farmer hypothesis, which essentially stated that a lot of the traits that we think of when we think of ADHD, hyperactivity, right, scattered, diffuse attention, hypersensitivity to stimuli, those were actually traits, and people with ADHD may actually have genes that encoded them for higher rates of survival and success in the context of being a hunter. Versus the modern world we live in, which post-agricultural revolution has been geared towards farmers. So the hunter gene has slowly been weeded out of the gene pool because we've selectively bred for people that are better farmers, right? They had the higher rates of survival, they had the higher rates of reproduction. But there is still a subsect of the population that has remnants of these genes that are now maladaptive to this modern environment, but in the context of being a hunter would have made you way more likely to survive and be successful, more importantly. And we can go into the details of that, and we can go into like some studies that they've done. They looked at remains of a human that was said to have the genetic genotype of someone with ADHD, and they also seem to happen to have higher bone mineral density, higher indicators of survival and nutrition. So that was very interesting. But yeah, the biggest thing about it was it took me from looking at what I had as a disorder that needed to be cured to traits that needed to have an environment that optimized for them so then I could be uniquely suited to win the games that I played. And the second that I applied that, my life got exponentially easier. And I just started winning all the games I was playing because I was playing the right games.
Is this like a strict binary, or is it more of a spectrum? Because I identify with some of the hunter stuff. I don't know if I have ADHD. I might. But I also sometimes I'm attracted to like the linear progress, and I find myself like in the middle of the two.
Yeah. You're attracted to the linear progress as in just leveling up every
Yeah,
day? Yeah, I mean, well, like, hey, a hunter would get better at hunting every
true.
day too. So, this is such a complex, like, culmination of genes and of what it means to be human that we want to just be binary. And I think that's the biggest pitfall that we as humans have because the rational faculty of our brain, it's relatively new, right? So we just want to classify things as yes or no, good or bad. When in reality, that's not how things work. That's just how we come to terms with our existence and, the physical world in front of us. So it's 100% a spectrum. And this is all a spectrum. It's very loose, right? It's just a way of looking at things. I think that there are some people out there with ADHD-like symptoms, right? Because ADHD is a disorder, and all disorders are a bundle of symptoms. There is no root cause of any disorder. It's not a disease, it's just a classification of symptoms. So there's people with ADHD-like symptoms that likely have what's actually dopamine deficiency, right? Dopamine deficiency syndrome. So they have actual deficits in their dopaminergic system unrelated to their genetics, right? It could be environmental, it could be developmental. Now, there's a subsect of that subsect that I believe are hunter types, and there's people that don't embody a lot of the ADHD traits that still just like would have traits that uniquely suited them for like being successful in a hunter's world. But you have to remember, we all came from hunters, not all of us came from farmers. All of us came from hunters at one point. So we all have a little bit of that gene in us. That is how us as humans are meant to live. It's just that now we live in this environment, so the people that were best suited to perform in this new agricultural and subsequently industrial environment had a higher likelihood of propagating, and thus there's more of them now.
That makes sense. You kind of touched on it, but what are the unique, let's do like the unique problems that hunter types face? Procrastination would be one of them. And then perhaps some of the hidden superpowers I guess you could say. Because a lot of people focus on the negatives. They're like, oh, I can't do this, or I get interested in things and I kind of hyper focus for a period of time, but I can never stick to things. I can never commit. Let's talk about the negatives and then the positives, and then how to double down on those positives, which I think very few people do.
Yeah. So I think first and foremost, like if you're a highly attuned hunter or anything, like you're going to operate really well when everything's dialed in that environment. You deviate from that environment and you have problems, right? Like a great white shark is like the apex predator of the sea. But you put a great white shark in an aquarium and it dies immediately. It can't live there. That doesn't make the apex shark weak. It doesn't make it disordered. It means that there's a problem with the tank that it's in. So I think that's the factor there. When it comes to like the traits that make someone with ADHD like hypothetically good for that type of context, it's the high adaptability, right? Like you put someone with ADHD in a room and they're able to adapt to that environment really quickly. And that's really good and really bad. And that's the reality of all of these things. It's good in one context, it's bad in the other. Like it's really good to have gills in the ocean. It's not a good thing to have gills if you live in the Sahara Desert. So like if you have really high adaptability, you're able to go to a new place and you're able to adapt to it immediately. It becomes the new norm for you, right? So you're able to perform really well there. The second you go to a new job or a new environment, you become acclimated to your environment. But you also get bored super quickly because you acclimate so quickly, right? So that's kind of that double-edged sword. You become hyper-focused on things because when you were in that context of hunting, you would need to be able to drop everything and hyper-focus on what was the most stimulating thing in front of you, which was either an assailant or the hunt, right? Like a prey. So that was really an effective trait to have, to be able to drop and forget everything that you're doing, hiding, like picking berries or whatever, and go chase that antelope with just religious focus. Now, when you're working and you hyper-focus on Call of Duty, that's when it becomes an issue, right? So this environment, because we have all of this unnatural stimuli and we're accustomed to a world that has very low stimuli, except for when stimuli matter. Think about the stimuli that you'd get, 7,000 years ago. It would either be sex or it would be hunting or it would be food, right? And that's really good because those are the most stimulating things in the world, so you focus on them. Now, we have TikTok, we have porn, we have video games, we have junk food, we have all of these things that those natural intuitive instincts that were so effective back in the day because we didn't have to think about it are now killing us, and that's why so many people with ADHD are either like at the bottom rung of society in terms of just being completely ineffective, or they're at the top rung because they figured out how to harness it. And I highly recommend that every single person with ADHD that's feeling down bad, that's feeling down and out, just go and look up some successful people that tend to have ADHD or ADHD-like tendencies. You'll find out it's a lot of them.
One of the ways this manifests itself, I think, especially for me, is shiny object syndrome. Like I'm the type of person, and I think a lot of people relate to this, where I can get interested in almost anything. Like everything's fascinating to me, and I can spend a day like reading books and papers and all that kind of stuff, when really what I should be doing is like committing to the project that I've committed to and staying on that. And I think it comes back to that stimuli thing where it's not video games, it's not junk food, it's like another productive type of project, but it's a shiny object. Like, how do you navigate that? Do you let yourself just be pulled by those things?
Yeah, man, I feel you on that. Productive procrastination, right? Now, once again, it's the hardest thing ever. You know how many projects I've started and then I'm like, you get this trapped in a corner feeling. Like, you know what you have to do, but you feel trapped in a corner, so you lash out and you do something else. And that used to like fuck with me so bad, excuse my language. They used to mess with me so bad that it was debilitating, right? It was debilitating, it was horrendous. Like I just couldn't get anything done and it really hurt my self-esteem. But I think that for your highest chance of like pursuing mastery and gaining mastery, which is what I think most people with ADHD are really driven by, it's by mastery and self-actualization, you need to build a life that enables you to follow your interests and your obsessions. And there's two tools that I use here. One is pursuing umbrella pursuits, right? So I create content online. And the way that I structure like my reputation online and what I create content online about is that I can talk about whatever I'm interested in. So by me chasing that novelty and by me chasing all of these side quests, right? I just bought gymnastic rings and now I'm obsessed with gymnastics. I just bought a rope thing. I'm obsessed with rope swinging. I get obsessed with things for a short period of time. That is contributing to that main thing and enabling me to stay consistent with that umbrella goal, right? So I found a game that rewards novelty. Right? Same with cooking, right? Like cooking, it's like my objective is to eat healthy. Well, I find a lot of novelty in making new dishes and new meals. And with working out, like my objective is to become like the best athletic version of myself. So I am rewarded by doing new training exercises. Like these are all umbrella goals that I pursue. So that's number one, pursue umbrella goals. Number two is leverage productive procrastination by always having something that you know you need to do, but like that gives you enough pressure that you're going to productively procrastinate, but isn't like all of your eggs in that basket. So I always have a project that I'm working on to give me that feeling of uncomfortability and to stop me from going and say play video games or do something else because I feel like I have nothing to do. So I have this project, and by my nature, I'm going to procrastinate on it, and instead I'm going to create content. So all of my content that I've created over the last 2.5 years or so, and especially a lot of this video content that I'm doing now, it's a direct byproduct of me procrastinating on this main thing. And I did that on purpose. Like these things that I'm doing here, if I fail at them, I don't really care, but I have accountability that I need to do them. So that's what's pushing all my content, by me just like purposely procrastinating.
I like that a lot. I think one of the shifts that I've gone through in the last few years is trusting that curiosity will pay off, even if I don't know exactly how. And it's like going down those rabbit holes, maybe it seems unproductive at the time, but you look back at your life, it's like it all, like the dots connect. And it's like, I studied that, or I learned about that, or I worked on that. It didn't seem important at the time. Now I can see how it's contributing to this. And on that note, I think one of the issues with modernity and like the world we live in is it's so cerebral, and we've lost, we kind of like discount intuition. Not kind of, we absolutely do. And I think it's to our detriment.
Yeah, I am so glad that you brought it up, because the number one skill that people with ADHD have that gives them their edge, right? Their secret sauce. It's pattern recognition. So pattern recognition is like being able to, like, just from consuming a lot of marketing material, be able to create something using all those patterns and not be able to think about it rationally. Like I'm a marketer, so like that's what I do. I've just consumed so much marketing material over the last X years. I just know how to apply it intuitively, right? So it's pattern recognition. And the best thing you can do if your primary skill that you're prioritizing, right? Some people prioritize accounting as their skill. Some people prioritize sales. Like if you're prioritizing pattern recognition as a skill, it's to inundate yourself with as much knowledge as possible. Doesn't matter what it is, right? Get obsessed with like Machiavellianism. Get obsessed with anything that you want, because you will find a way to essentially add that as a feather in your cap that you can then apply to every single problem that you face. So you need to create a life, and we talked about this before the call, right? Like the whole 4-hour work week. Create a life where it's your job to go on these creative pursuits and these explorative obsessions and binges of content. So then you gather all this information and you can utilize that to intuitively pattern connect, and you will be so ahead of the curve. You're just going to be an incredible problem solver, right? And that's really what hunters are. Now, when it comes to intuition, hunter types are so much more effectively guided by their intuition than rationality. And you have to remember, our intuitive thinking processes, the intuitive regions of our brain, developed way before this more executive rational thinking function area of our brain developed. And as I mentioned prior, like that rational part of our brain, it's kind of just developed. We think of modern humans as being like anatomically fixed and anatomically finished, but we're not. The reason we all have lower back pain is because we're like halfway evolved from being quadrupeds into bipeds, right? But the least evolved part of us is our brain, right? That's why magicians have jobs in the first place, because it's that easy to trick us, right? And they want you to maintain, and by they I just mean like the powers that be, right? Like civilization. Yeah. They want you to be a rational thinker because it's easy to trick your rationality, right? The gut instinct does not lie. And you have to attune your intuition, right? It's called gut instinct for a reason. You need to find the signal through that noise, because we've been shutting this down both biologically and just cognitively for our entire lives. So you need to regain that intuition. You need to learn to listen to it. And once you do that, like, it's hard to go back. And then what you want to do is you want to back up your intuition with rationality. I think that intuition is built off of data. So you need to be constantly gathering data so you can then like essentially train and power your intuition.
That makes a ton of sense. For me, it's like rationality is useful to avoid catastrophe and like things with major negative asymmetry. Like you see people who intuitively go and try and I don't know, like delusional people who go and try and build the next SpaceX, and it's like, yeah, it's probably not going to work, and you're going to waste a lot of money. And like, if you had exercised some rationality, you'd realize that's not the thing to do, even if it might feel intuitive to you. I forgot who said it or who told me it, but they said intuition is highly refined experience, which kind of summarizes what you were saying. It's like that the wealth of all the knowledge, all the research you've done, you can't exactly explain how it's come to be or how it's influencing your thinking, but it is.
I want to add to that because you bring up a really good point. It's about refining that intuition and making that intuition sensible, right? I don't believe in like, I see so many people just make poor decisions, like irrational decisions. And they're like, oh, my gut's just telling me to do it. Like, well, your gut's probably wrong. Like, it's very possible that your gut's just wrong. And I don't think that everyone should follow their intuition. I think that you need to refine it. But at the end of the day, every single intuitive decision that I make is completely backed up by rational facts, right? Like, it's completely backed up by that. And you need to do that as a practice because you may believe it intuitively, but you're going to have to explain it rationally to other people because nobody cares about your intuition. They care about facts. So that I think that's really important. You should always like strive to do both. Never be fully rational, never be fully intuitive. Like you want to entertain both sides of everything. But anyway, continue.
If you're on the extremely rational, like cerebral side of the spectrum, which likely means you overthink a lot, you probably don't have a bias towards action. Are there some practical things you can do to, I guess, force yourself, maybe not force, but surrender yourself to the more intuitive side?
Yeah, great question. The most important thing is to let it rip. Let it rip. Every time that you're posed with a question, you have a gut instinct as to which way you want to go, right? But you're pushing it down and you're pushing it down and you're pushing it down. So you got to let it rip. My intuition really flourished when I fixed my health. When I stopped being in a constant state of inflammation and when I really reconnected with nature, right? And I remember because it was when I really got into spending all my time outside and being grounded and removing a lot of these just oxidative and inflammatory components of modern day life. That's when my intuition really was able to shine through, which makes sense. Like, you're getting back to your roots, and it just so happens that the more primal mammalian part of your brain shines through. So I think that's factor number one. Factor number two is trusting your intuition, right? So when can you utilize your intuition in low risk environments? Like, are you going to use your intuition on that big, like, financial contribution? Probably not. You should probably go with a balance of like rationality there. But are you going to use it on where to go to dinner tonight? Absolutely. So you got to train it. You got to start training it in low risk environments. Use your intuition more. You got to shut down the executive functioning part of your brain a little bit. And that's something that people with ADHD are good at. That's why they're impulsive. They're impulsive because their intuition is overpowering their rationality. They don't need to wait for it to tell it what to do. And you'd have to do that too, right? Because if you see someone going over the hill and they're walking over the hill towards you, you don't have the time to rationally say like, I wonder if this guy's going to kill me or not. Let me ask him, right? Let me just rationally make an assessment here. Split second decision, is he going to kill me or not? React. So, yeah.
I want to dive into the health stuff, but have you seen that meme where it's like like the midwit meme, and it's like first idea, and then the guy in the middle is like, oh, I need to analyze it for 8 hours.
Yeah.
I want to coin this term, maybe it's coined, but first idea maximalism. It's like the first idea that comes to you is usually the right one. And if you're too rational, you're like, no, it can't be that simple. Or that can't be it. Let me go like to the drawing board and figure it all out. And then you eventually round trip it all the way back to the first idea. But you spent like 12 hours going through a bunch of nonsense to get there.
Yeah, impulsivity maxing. Well, that's what I was talking about earlier. That bell curve meme is a perfect example of like this hunter theory, right? In the middle, you have all the guys that are being highly rational and they're trying to assess everything, like the midbrains. No offense. And that's not a bad thing, but it's just highly rational. And that's like the general norm. On one side or the other, you have like the people that are making intuitive decisions. Like it's the ADHDers, right? They end up on one side or the other. They will not end up in the middle. If you want to be in the middle as an ADHDer, you're going to have to get like a diet and meth prescription from your healthcare provider, and you're going to be miserable your whole life, right? You're either going to be a total Dionysus, like living in detriment, or you're actually going to be quite successful and have a really cool life. And it's up to you to decide which one.
On the health stuff, like you became more intuitive when you took health seriously, but what did that look like for you? And then I've got a follow-up question to that, which I'll ask.
Yeah, so I've always been into health in one format or the other, but we seem to get confused about what health really means, and our perspective on it changes, as it should. So when I first got into health, I got into fitness when I was like 14 years old, right? I remember being pinned in wrestling, and I hated that so much. Like as a little kid, that was just like the first ingrained memory is me being pinned. And I'm like, I'm never going to let this happen again, right? I had that. And then I was obsessed with animals, and I was really obsessed with animals, and it kind of irked me that humans were just so weak in comparison to other animals from a physical standpoint. So I was like, I want to be able to like take down a lion or at least like a large deer, you know? I don't want to be trampled by a moose or something like that. And then third was I felt like I didn't have a lot of control in other areas of my life because I had the impulsivity of ADHD, and I had a really hard time controlling my mood. And a lot of people with ADHD, they tend to have kind of like anxiety or depression as a comorbidity because of this hypersensitivity to these inputs, right? Like that's something that people need to understand. It's like some people are hypersensitive to their environment, their light environment, their food environment, their lifestyle, and all these things. So if anything's off kilter, they're going to be getting those signals that are going to say like, hey, something's wrong here. We need to fix it. And that manifests as depression. So you have that, you feel depressed, you feel down, you feel anxious, you feel not right. You go to a doctor, they give you SSRIs, right? When in reality, that is like utility. The propensity for depression is utility because that is a highly attuned signal that's telling you like, hey, something needs to change here. So that is one thing that like I see with a lot of people. It's like you got to listen to that. You got to listen to the anxiety and depression. But anyway, I got into that. Was put on SSRIs when I was young, and I was on those for like the majority of my teens and then my early 20s. I had an adverse reaction to the SSRIs. I was on them for a while. They desensitized parts of my brain, these certain serotonin receptors. And it completely flatlined my mood. Like I was unable to feel highs or lows. I had horrible anhedonia, right? No ability to feel pleasure, just like relationships tumbled. I was relegated to a life of intellectualism, right? Because nothing was enjoyable. That actually had a lot of utility, like a lot of utility, because I was just like forcefully stoic. But I was so like just miserable because I was such an emotional person before that was really driven by passion and pursuit of pleasure that it just completely ruined me. So I was obsessed with figuring out how to fix that. And that took me down so many rabbit holes. It coincided with the time that I was in cybersecurity and I was working a really technically demanding job. So I got accustomed to being behind a computer. And I was pursuing that so deeply. I really got into pharmacology, and I really just felt like I had such strong autonomy with my brain and my body. It's like, oh shit, like I want to feel this way. I can figure out a way to make myself feel this way right now. And that dug deeper and deeper, and I got really obsessed with biohacking. And then I got to a point where I was getting so obsessed with biohacking, but it wasn't serving me at all. Like it was serving me from a business standpoint. I was doing really well, but I remember like looking up one day, and I was in Mexico City. I'm like I did all of this, and I still feel the same way that I felt. Like I can't feel any enjoyment, and I've been trying for so long. Whatever, screw it. I'm just gonna go like kind of mess around and just give up. You know, I'm gonna go to the beach and just hang out. So I moved to the beach. You know, I shut down some projects that I was working on and like really just opened up my time to just hang out. And it was just there that I snapped one day. It was actually when I was like partying because I kind of just gave up. So I started partying after being sober for 8 months. And I was partying and I drank a bunch of tequila and I took some modafinil and it fixed my brain, funny enough. And that kind of opened up that secondary door. But I think a lot of it was the nature component of it as well. But I guess what I'm going with here is that like people are like, oh, I got into health and ever since then it's been the same. No, it's like I've been trying to optimize my brain and body since I was young. And I've gone through so many different chapters of what I found that to mean. And now it's to the point where my health is so like solid at a baseline, and my cognition is super solid, my mood is super solid, my energy is super solid, that everything else is just extra now, right? So I don't need to hyper fixate on it like I did before. I can focus on those other components that make life important, right? Like responsibility, like family, like relationships, like pursuit of enjoyment and art and skills and things of that sort that are kind of higher up on Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Do you think people overrate the pharmacological side of things, supplementation, and underrate lifestyle changes? Because I've been in the biohacking crowd for a while. And I mean, there's so many people who, to me, if I'm reading it correctly, focus on like these kind of 1% shifts and ignore the 80% fundamentals and like foundations.
Yeah, I think that people look at them in isolation way too much because I do both, right? Like I lived on a isolated beach with no supplements and no grocery store for like 40, like the nearest supermarket was like 45 minutes away. But I also like experiment and research with peptides. I do a lot of biohacking still. I'm like in front of the red light. I am doing all of these things in conjunction with that other lifestyle, right? And I know that these don't make up for the important things that I have to fix about myself elsewhere, right? Like you can't out mental the physical and you can't out physical the mental. The problem is people get really emotionally blocked with their problems, right? It's a lot easier to solve someone else's problems and they're very clear to see, but they don't see that same in themselves. So a lot of people have one main thing that they really need to get over, but they don't want to, so they hyperfixate on something else. That's why every health guru that I see, and the reason that I moved away from like being the more in-depth, like deep research health guru, is because none of them were aspirational. None of them were actually living a life that they should be living because they know this much about health. They weren't in really good shape. They didn't have the physicality that I was looking for. They didn't have the mentality that I was looking for. Their cognitive output and their cognitive capabilities weren't impressive. So it's like, this obviously isn't working for you. You go ahead and continue to be a researcher, but don't say that you know the keys to health. When in reality, you know the keys to a few small things that you're really just going way too deep on. So that's why I went more expansive, and that's why most of the content I post about now is like, here's how to enjoy your food. Like, here's how to have a good time with friends, because those are what's really important. I still do a lot of biohacking. Like, I probably do more now in terms of like experimentation and research than I did before, but now it's just compartmentalized as a secondary side quest that's just enjoyable. Like, nothing here is really going to change my life. It's just something that I do in conjunction with all these other pillars. And it's all about these fundamental pillars of health and life and self-actualization.
There's another side to this, which is people, and I've done this a lot, underrate how potent some of those 1% shifts can actually be, because they end up being like 10% shifts. An example for me is like, I years ago started taking ashwagandha and it completely screwed me up. And
Yeah.
fortunately I got off it soon enough, because I know some people have like lasting effects from it. But it's like, that's just a small supplement that most people think is harmless. And like, it completely, like within 2 days after taking it, I was like so numb and just didn't care about anything. And I was like, it's this pill. And I think on the reverse of that is that there are supplements, and for whatever reason, you would know a lot more about this than I do. Perhaps it's a deficiency or something else, that when people take them, it like flips a switch and things normalize or things get a lot better. For you, have there been any sort of like low hanging fruit or like high asymmetry tweaks like that have helped you?
So that's a great point. And interestingly enough, ashwagandha is very like, people have ashwagandha horror stories similar to SSRI horror stories, right? So that numbness that you felt, that's how I felt for multiple years because of the SSRI. Like ashwagandha and SSRIs, they have a very similar serotonin reuptake inhibition effect that causes a lot of these similar symptoms in some cases. Now,
Why is it that some people can, like I got so heavily affected by it and someone else can take it and it helps?
yeah, bioindividuality. It's so real, right? I like, because I live with a few of my business partners, and we all work with supplements and we experiment with a lot of supplements. So we'll get a new supplement and we have drastically different reactions, right? Because our level of homeostasis is different. The way that we respond to certain compounds is different. We have genetic mutations, we have different phenotypes, we have different haplotypes that are going to affect the way that compounds make us feel. So that's one of the reasons that I don't go out and like really talk about products willy-nilly. I still showcase them, and I want to showcase them more, but it's so important, and that's why I want to reserve it just for the newsletter, because I want to maintain that caveat that cycle everything, know that there are risks for everything, know that mixing certain compounds together can be very dangerous, and know that like you shouldn't be taking things for extended periods of time, ever. I cycle everything. People are like, what is a supplement that you've taken every day for a year? There's a few, but those are just given my, risk tolerance, risk profile, and knowing that like the product that I have is actually quality. But yeah, bioindividuality is real. In terms of like something that like it's all about what you're trying to solve. And unless you can say, I'm taking this supplement to do X, Y, and Z, here's the mechanisms that it's acting on, here's the contraindications, and here's the potential side effects I need to be wary for, you shouldn't be taking a supplement. I hate to break it to you. So that's factor number one. And that's really like when I say that I'm more into supplementation than I am before, that's what I mean. I'm more into supplementation, I take less because I know more about it. When I first started, I was taking ginkgo biloba every day for a year. That's horrible. That's a horrible idea. But now, you have respect and reverence for it and you know how to utilize it correctly. In terms of compounds that I've really found success with, it's a few compounds that I've utilized to kind of enhance my androgen system, like my androgenic system, my testosterone, my dihydrotestosterone, and my androgen receptors. So, I've been really vehemently experimenting with those over the last year or so because I started taking them about a year ago. Before that, I never took a T-boosting supplement. And I think that was really necessary because me taking SSRIs and because me taking Accutane have destroyed those systems. So modern problems do require modern solutions, and my life has been highly positively benefited by supplements. But my life has also been very much destroyed by pharmaceuticals. So
I think some people might be listening to this and they're like, I just don't know where to start with all this. And maybe they're on Twitter, maybe on YouTube, they see some guy over here who's talking about the carnivore diet, another person over here who's talking about repeat, and they're like, oh, I should eat more sugar. And then there's people in between, and then there's people saying you have to ground or you have to do red light or you should take these supplements. Fasting destroys you. Fasting is great for you. Like, how does someone who's faced with all this complexity, like, how do they start actually making progress and start building a foundation, not just of understanding, but improvement?
yeah. So understand that unlike any other hobby or pursuit, your health is going to be just increasingly more important the older you age. So you better start now. I'm lucky because I started when I was 14. So I racked 10,000 hours before I got out of college. And that's really important. That's why I kind of was able to get that jump. But as a default, the less is more, first and foremost. Less is more. And the more you can align with what just makes sense from an evolutionary perspective, the better. Now, there is then room for modern problems requiring modern solutions and for super physiological performance, right? Because if we were saying like obviously like super physiological, like our entire world is super physiological at this point, right? Like the fact that we have air conditioning and airplanes and all these things. So super physiological performance is something that's worth pursuing. But it's a risky game. Supplementation is a game that you need to be really keen on. So err on the side of caution, find people that you really trust, and still take their content with a grain of salt. Ask yourself, would I trade places with the person that I'm taking advice from, right? So you hear someone online talking about repeat and talking about how sugar is good for you and exercise is bad for you, but they're anonymous, right? They finally get doxxed and they're fat, they're chubby, they're pale, and they look like shit, right? I don't want to take advice from that person because that's not what I want, right? Maybe they feel great, that's cool, but
We could name names, but let's not.
yeah, we can name names. It's every Peter ever. So, like that's the thing, and like they all have. And this is an interesting thing too with the health crowds is that they start embodying the same identity. They start talking the same. They act the same. There's two reasons here. One, because health groups are cults. So, for your sake, never identify with any health group. Like you are not a carnivore. You are not a Peter. You are an individual who just happens to be experimenting with a carnivore diet at this point in time. But also understand the fact that like people that hyperfixate on their health are doing it because they feel lack in other areas of their life. They're overcompensating. And really like I think that's why I'm so candid about who I am and my life, and I share everything about my life, and I'm very open on the internet, is because I want people to have context around the person that they're taking advice from. And I just say, this is what I'm doing, this is how I feel, and I'm very clear that bioindividuality is real. But me as someone who went from being like a pretty high androgen guy and having like really high energy and output and emotion and confidence to being absolutely destroyed to then being able to rebuild myself over a period of years just through like deliberate trial and error, I feel like I figured some things out. And now I'm able to be in the point where like I have been able to figure these things out for other people as well. So, kind of bringing out those playbooks, but it all comes down to like, what are you doing this for? Why are you going carnivore? Why are you going Peter? Are you just trying to pursue longevity? If you're trying to pursue longevity, you would just do what everyone, like the 90-year-old grandma did, right? Like just avoid toxins, avoid contaminants, and spend a lot of time with friends and, drink wine and smoke cigarettes. That's what most centenarians do. But the most important thing here is like, don't align with any of them. Understand that this is going to be a lifelong process and just start experimenting, right? Just start experimenting, gather data. This is the most important thing that you can do is just gather data about your life. Intuition is built off of data. Can you treat yourself like a science experiment, right? Can you remove the emotional ties between you and your actions and just learn to observe yourself? Can you just observe your actions and behaviors and start gathering this sense of self of this is me, these are my tendencies, this is the environment that I think that I operate best in, this is the environment that I think I operate worst in. When I eat these foods, I feel X. When I eat these foods, I feel Y, and then go from there.
I like that a lot. I think there's a lot to be said about that observation piece. Like I used to work out heavy in the morning, and it took me a long time to realize that my cognitive performance was suffering afterwards. Like I found it hard to engage in deep work. And I don't know exactly why. I think it was because my body just wanted to rest. Everything did. And when I moved my workouts to the afternoon, life just got a lot better. My work improved. I was more productive. And it's like, you'll have someone say, oh, you should work out in the morning because X, Y, and Z. And it's like, if you do that and it doesn't work for you, trust yourself over some dude on the internet who's telling you this. Like, that's the highest signal you can have.
100%. 100%, right? So that's kind of this idea of pursuing your intuition and trusting yourself and then backing up those decisions with data. That's the key here. And that's really how I approach all of this. That's how I think people should approach it, is I'm going to do this because it feels right. But then I'm going to try to figure out why this is the right thing to do. So then moving forward, I'll have more vindication and reasoning as to why to continue doing it this way.
I want to get back to the cognitive performance stuff, but there's it all connects together. And I think that's one thing I wanted to stress, which is like my ability to engage in the work, to focus, to commit to projects. It's directly linked to my physical health, my performance, and one piece that I'd love to dive deep on is the Pro-Androgen Lifestyle, as you call it. And you've got a great article on it, which I'll link below. And a great podcast as well with Dr. Abud Bakri, which I loved. It was so good, man. But tell us more about that. What is the Pro-Androgen Lifestyle? Why do men need to engage in it? How does it help with cognitive performance as well?
Yeah, man, that is so funny. Because I had a consult this morning and it was a follow-up consult of some dude, highly successful, but he just felt like he lost that spark, right? And I had to explain that to him. And then I went and I recorded a video on it as well. But modern life is inherently emasculating, right? Because modern life pursues comfort. And the worst thing that you can do, especially as a man, is to be comfortable, like consistently comfortable. Like comfort's the killer of dreams. Comfort kills everything, right? I think that like men are cultivated through hardship, right? To an extent, like men are cultivated through difficult activities and competition and conflict and pursuing. That's why every kid always played play war. Every single game and every single movie, blockbuster, it's all related to some sort of conflict or war. We crave it, right? We crave it and we need it in our lives, but we don't have it. So what do? We kind of just cognitively cuck ourselves by playing video games and watching porn and doing all of these fake
engaging it by proxy.
Yes, engaging it by proxy, where it's enough to feel like we got it, but it's not enough to enact any of the biological responses. Like nobody's ever gotten high testosterone from playing video games, right? So I realized that as I was coming out of college, and I was just I caught a picture of myself in the mirror. I'm like, oh my God, I am so emasculated. I'm just like a shell of the man that I once was. And it was affecting every area of my life. It was affecting my work. It was affecting my relationships. It was affecting the way that I saw myself. It was affecting the way that I interacted with the world, right? Because I was just not a strong and confident man like I knew I was deep down. And that's what happens when you go to a liberal arts school and you go the typical route. You're in the workplace, right? You are now playing that game. And like I said, humans are incredible at adapting to new environments. You've just adapted to that emasculated environment. So it's on you. The onus is on you to redesign a pro-androgen lifestyle. We think it's so odd, and we have a really hard time gripping our heads around the fact that hormones are in part a mental game, right? Which isn't that crazy to say that you can essentially think your way to higher testosterone, because we know that cortisol raises when we're stressed and we have stressful thoughts. And the best way to lower cortisol is to be more mindful, right? But cortisol is a hormone. Cortisol is in the same cholesterol metabolization pathway as testosterone, right? That's why cortisol and testosterone are inversely correlated. So we know that we can impact our hormones via our thinking. We know that there's all of these, like, the HPG axis, right? There's these axes where we're having this two-way communication between our balls and our brain saying, make more testosterone, make less testosterone. So there's a mental component to having high androgens, right? And we are not living a life that's telling our body that we need to make more testosterone. Your body creates testosterone in response to environmental stimuli. The reason it creates testosterone is to enhance your ability to compete with other men, right? To compete for resources, to compete for reproduction, and to compete for mating, to compete for survival. But we live in an environment where competition is looked down upon. It is not good to be a highly autonomous and individualistic competitive man. And I believe that is why there is this epidemic of male depression, male anxiety, male loneliness, and male lack of fulfillment, right? It is the one problem that I see across all demographics, all psychographics, every single component of life. I think every man is struggling with this. The only people that I see that have been able to get out of it are either so crazy that they're just unaffected by the emasculation of the world, or they deliberately created a pro-androgen lifestyle. Now, what does that pro-androgen lifestyle look like? For me, it looked like moving to like a small town on the beach in Mexico, buying a dirt bike, right? Never wearing shoes, just like living a really crazy lifestyle, spearfishing, all that stuff, and completely removing myself from this emasculating culture and this emasculating lifestyle, right? I did that for a while, like 2 years, and I completely changed myself. And that was really good. Not everyone can do that, but man, it worked for me. You need to find ways to implement that in your own life, right? How can you get more competition in every day? How can you do more bold things? How can you get that high T feedback loop going? The best way to do it is to start training, right? Start some form of martial art. Get punched in the face. Punch somebody back, right? Can you be more assertive? When somebody budges you in line, instead of being like, oh man, like they budged me, and making yourself submissive, can you stand up for yourself without being too argumentative or aggressive or confrontational, right? Can you hold your own? Can you walk through public feeling strong and assertive, like hold your space? All of these components that are signaling to your brain, okay, cool, I'm a high T guy, so I need to produce more T so I can continue to be a high T guy. And this is where compounds come in. This is where you can jumpstart that process by utilizing testosterone boosting compounds and herbs to then make it easier for you to do those high T things. You wouldn't take pre-workout and not work out, right? You wouldn't take Adderall and not do cognitively demanding tasks. Why would you take T boosting herbs and not do high T things?
Yeah, that's so true. Something you talked about, I think, in your podcast on this was there were two things. The first was like competing with men of equal ability, which I think was in the context of maybe jiu-jitsu. I've been training jiu-jitsu for like coming up in 2 years, and it's completely changed my life for reasons I think we just talked about. Like lifting weights for a decade, and you know, you get strong and you get the natural T-boost from that, but there's something about competing and like getting that feedback which the gym doesn't give you, because the weights don't fight back. They don't pin you down. They don't make you suffer. They don't choke you. And I've found like when I do like a rolling session and I'm rolling with people who are, you know, smaller or maybe less competent, I'll come away, I'll get home, I'll be like, oh, that was good, but you know, there's something missing. When I go and it's hard and it's like 50-50, or I'm losing a lot, I'm struggling, there's something about that just lasts. Like gives me a glow for days on end.
Yeah. Well, that's you gaining those extra androgen points, right? Because you rise to the level of adversity that you face, and there's a golden window of difficulty that you want to be in. This is true for all adaptation. It's true for learning, and it's true for pro-androgenization, if that's what we want to call it, right? So if you're competing against people that are way better than you, especially if you're kind of new or if you don't have, like, some people just have that like stubborn mindset where it's like, I just got to get better. But you're going to be like relegated to that lower rung in that hierarchy, right? So you're actually probably gonna get lower testosterone. This isn't exact, right? This is not pseudoscience, but it's not like exact science. But that really is how it works. Like you become subjugated. So you need to find those like that equal training. And the best way to do that is to just grow with people. So with my buddies and with my roommates, we're sparring a lot, and we spar safely. We obviously, like, brain injury is a real thing, and like I've had a lot of concussions in the past. I don't want to get any more, but we spar a lot, and because we're on the same level, we're just growing every single day together. And I was talking to my buddy who started training with me recently. He's like, "Man, this guy's super strong, super strong. He just like was not lifting for the last 4 months. He's only been training MMA. I just lifted with him the other day, and he did 225 for 19 reps, and he's like 165 pounds." Which is absurd. It's absurd, right? But he's like, man, I don't look at it the same way. Now when I see big guys at the gym, I'm just not intimidated by them at all. You see through the facade, which is modern life, which is all posturing, right? You see through the facade of the big tough guy in the nice car with the big truck. You see through the facade of the guy with big muscles but a super small neck, right? And a jaw that looks like it could be broken by a strong gust of wind. So it changes the way that you interact with the world, and it changes the way that the world interacts with you, most importantly. That was the biggest shift. When I started training martial arts, it changed the way that I walk around. I was making eye contact with people more. People would like get in my way or get in front of me, and normally I would be like, oh. Now it's like you don't move, and it changes everything. And I'm not a big guy either. So it's like, people like putting these excuses on, like, oh, it's because I'm not big enough. It's because, I'm too short. But no, it's really just because you don't feel confident in your own abilities.
Something you said was that we rise to the level of adversity. And one of the things I like regret in my 20s, I'm 29, but I built a business, I achieved the 4-hour work week lifestyle. I've talked about this on the channel. And I got so comfortable. And when you're in that state, like that homeostatic state, it's quite hard to force yourself to rise up to challenges again, because it's like if you haven't gone to the gym in a year and then you go lift again, like, it's going to be hard. You're not going to be as strong. You're going to find every reason not to go. And when it comes to like the pro-androgen lifestyle, I think you talked about this elsewhere. It's like if you don't have a reason to have high testosterone, it's probably not gonna come. Like, if you don't, like, why would it, right? If you're not hunting, you're not doing these things, like, you don't need this high androgen. Like, why would you expect it to develop?
Yeah. Man, the human body and the human brain, our real like secret sauce is how adaptive and opportunistic we are, right? So if you stop using your muscle, your body's like, I don't need this anymore. I'm going to get rid of it, right? Because it's metabolically taxing. We have a finite amount of biological application points, or like biological attribution points, whatever you want to call it. It's like Skyrim skill trees, right? You only have so much. So if you're not using something, your body's like, well, I'm not going to use any more biological energy on that. I'm going to go apply it to something else. So if you're not doing high T activities, it's going to, unless you're a genetic specimen, you're going to kind of wither away that function. And it's the same with like exercise. It's the same with physical capabilities. It's the same with muscle. It's the same with cognitive capacity as well. You don't use it, you lose it. And, I talk about androgen receptor sensitivity, and that's a whole nother bag. Like, it's a whole nother can of worms. But the best way to increase androgen receptor sensitivity is to activate those androgen receptors, right? So when we're talking about androgen receptors in the muscles, it's to activate them, right? That's how you keep them sensitive, and that's how you keep them dense. But we also have those androgen receptors in our brain. For the people listening, androgen receptors are what those hormones bind to, like testosterone and dihydrotestosterone. If there's no binding going on, it doesn't matter how much testosterone you have, there's not going to be any testosterone signaling, because that's what hormones are. They're signaling molecules. So if you don't have anything, like no androgen receptor sensitivity, no testosterone signaling. And the number one thing that modern life and these modern toxins that we always talk about, like the number one detriment that I see is their ability to interfere with androgen signaling.
How does being high T influence cognitive performance? Because someone might be listening to this and they're like, oh, yeah, I get it. Like, but, I work at my laptop and I do knowledge work. Like, I don't think I need to do all this stuff. To which a response would be like, why wouldn't you want to, as a man, like, be stronger and be better? But how does it influence cognitive performance?
Yeah, the physical component of androgens is just a byproduct, right? The fact that I've been able to get really, really strong and just have really good recovery, and I just like have so much physical energy, and I'm like shredded. I was able to get shredded after being pudgy for a while. That's just a byproduct. The reason that I prioritize like androgen maxing is for the cognitive components, right? Because like I said, you have androgen receptors in your brain. And we think of masculinization, right? Like what do you think of when you think of masculinization? You think of a deep voice, you think of like body hair, you think of muscles, and you think of large quads and delts and neck, because that's where the primary like androgen receptor density is in your body. But we don't think about the masculinization of the brain that occurs. There are people with just inherently more androgenized brains than others. And a lot of this occurs in development, but this can also happen like post development, like after you're 25 and up, right? So when you think of like androgen signaling in the brain and having like a high T brain, it's confidence, it's just assertiveness, it's deliberation, right? Making decisions and being confident in those decisions, desire, drive, motivation, libido, vitality, vigor, right? And a lot of it comes down to the best proxy being like drive, like libido, right? And sex drive. And a lot of people think that and like, well, I don't need like higher sex drive. Like I'm in a long lasting relationship, or like sex isn't that important to me. That's not the point. The point is that you're primarily driven by a desire for reproduction, right? Like, there's a lot of other components to the human condition, but a large like internal desire is the drive to reproduce and for survival of you and your kin. Right? So when you have that high sex drive and you're able to transmute that into other things, like that is where true life force comes from. Napoleon Hill, Think and Grow Rich, he dedicated the outro chapter to his book to sexual transmutation. Like that is how important that is. And we're doing all of these things that are completely flatlining our sex drive, right? You're watching porn, so you're making your brain think that you have all the women in the world and you have no need to go out and actually pursue any form of women or relationships or sex, right? You're on SSRIs, they're shielding SSRIs like Tic Tacs, which completely flatline your sex drive, and that flatlines your drive for everything else in this life. So my experience because there's ways that you can acutely enhance like androgen signaling, right? You can free up testosterone from SHBG, sex hormone binding globulin. You can enhance receptor sensitivity in your brain pretty acutely. You can take these and you can observe like, wow, I am so much more deliberate. I want to take lead and I want to take charge. Like I feel so much more confident walking around in public. I feel like I want to protect the people around me. I feel like I want to go and make things happen. That typical teeter-tottering on decisions that I used to have is completely gone. I know exactly what I need to do and I'm going to go and I'm going to do it. You know how much easier that makes life when you're just deliberate about things and you have an inherent drive? You don't need all these hacks and tools to get shit done. You just want to get shit done by nature of being alive. That's what pro-androgen signaling in the brain does to you.
Something you talk about is gamifying your life, which might help to put a lot of what we've talked about into practicality. What does it mean to do that?
Yeah. So humans understand the world best through stories, right? We want to have rational explanations for the world, but we can't, right? That's just because we want to be in control. The reason that the one thing that's been passed down for thousands and thousands of years, since prehistory, quite literally, because it's been passed down through generations before we knew how to write, is stories, right? Every single culture has stories that explain the rational and the physical world, and the irrational and the metaphysical world as well. So we understand things through stories, and games are stories. But most importantly, like games provide structure, and games provide a forecast and a playbook, essentially, to getting shit done. So I grew up playing video games. Video games were a huge part of my life. Video games are probably a huge part of most of our lives because that's just the era that we grew up in, like anyone who's in their 20s or even in their 30s. So whether we like it or not, a lot of our understanding of the world was based on the fact that during these periods of like imprinting, we were stuck behind a computer accomplishing objectives, right? We were getting the golden gun. We were leveling up our skill trees in Skyrim. So that's how we perceive the world, and that's how we perceive accomplishments. Because that's what video games do. Video games trick you into thinking that you're accomplishing things in the real world, and they keep you hooked. And I realized this when I was building threat intelligence software, and my job and my goal was to make it as addictive as possible. And as I was figuring out how to make these things addictive, right? Using psychology, color psychology, gamification. I read Hooked by Neri Yao. I was like, holy shit, like I'm being tricked here. I'm the one being played by Instagram, by my Xbox. So I got rid of all of that shit. But you can use that to your advantage, right? So you figure out how this is being used against you, and then you apply it so it's to your own benefit, right? And I gamify everything. Everything to me is a game. I'm a creative character, right? So I'm actively playing a character in any context because we have this sense of self. And everyone's like, oh, I got to be my authentic self. But that's not true. We've been wearing multiple faces for the entirety of society, right? Like the person that's like a Fortune 500 CEO is acting drastically different at work than he is at home. And he's acting drastically different at home than he is with his friends. And he's acting drastically different with his friends than he is when he's going up and doing a keynote speech. These are all different characters that he's playing that make up his sense of self. So you need to remove this idea that there's only one person and that you playing a character is disingenuous, because no, you're just embodying other components of your life, right? But by gamifying it, you remove the friction, which is cognitive dissonance. You remove the friction, which is things being too serious and having too much risk. When you look at everything as a game, you know that there's really no downside because you can just respawn, right? So then you take those components of what it is, like what is the structure of a game? You have a main quest, and then you have checkpoints along the way. You're leveling up certain skills, right? And then you have side quests that keep things interesting. So how can you apply this to your main life, your main mission, and your day-to-day? So everything I do is really quite gamified. Like I have skill trees that I'm leveling up 24/7. I'm looking at it that way. I have things that I'm trying to unlock. I have that next golden gun. But the most important thing about gamification is something that I realize with games as well, is I work so hard to upgrade my guns on Call of Duty to get that gold camo. I grind my ass off, right? Because it's a linear progression. The second that I get that golden gun, I never use it again. It's the same thing in life. Like I rarely set goals because every time that I set a goal, the second I hit it, I'm like, this doesn't mean anything. And it was so demoralizing to me. But now understanding that the goals are not meant to be the end objective, the goals are meant to be the thing that are just keeping me on that path and keeping it enjoyable along the way and keeping me incrementally improving. That's what really gets me going. So I gamify everything. Yet, like, I know that it's not that serious. And I know that there's a deeper purpose. Like, there's a deeper mission behind everything that I'm doing.
Something I've thought a lot about, and I made a video on, is like the power of reframing. Like, you can basically trick yourself into making hard situations a lot easier, or do psychological tricks to commit yourself to things. An example I use is like, if you're committing to like a 2-year project to write a book, and you start worrying and overthinking, oh, what if it doesn't sell? Like, what if it doesn't do well commercially and all this kind of stuff? It's like you can reframe that and kind of like adjust the upside and downside to get yourself to do the work. Where it's like, well, if I spend 2 years on a book and it fails, I'll probably still come out better off than if I didn't work on this project at all. Like, I'm going to develop certain skills. I'm going to develop the ability to focus, something I call meta benefits. It's like if you spend 90 days working on a project and it fails, but you do 3 hours of deep work every day and like you commit to it, you get these meta benefits that like transfer across to whatever else you're doing next. And when you have that frame of mind, it's like you really can't go wrong. Like you can't fail at all.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. And I think that has been I use the word secret sauce a lot, but like that has been huge for me. It's getting in the habit and having really low resistance to framing things, right? Because when you're in marketing, you realize that it's very easy to convince someone to something if you just keep on saying it. And you learn this when you like hear about like affirmations and this stuff. And it's true, right? Because our rational brain, like you throw stuff at your subconscious long enough, doesn't matter if it's not true. You're gonna start believing it. That's why people get these negative thought loops and they're so bad that they need to take ketamine or they need to take something to disrupt that default mode network to remove those thinking patterns. But if you don't program yourself, someone else is going to. So there's two things here. I want to talk about what did you call it? Meta qualities?
Meta benefits.
Meta benefits. So yeah, I always talk about acquiring meta skills, and it's very similar. And I think that we're on the same wavelength with that. I think like that was big too. I used to watch a lot of like productivity YouTube, and that was a big thing. But the first thing is reframing and realizing how powerful of a tool that is, and realizing that you can really create your own story and your own reality. And the way you do so is by going through your past and creating a story, right? Just like gamification, this is storification of your life. So me looking at that period in my life where I was so miserable because I could not feel pleasure at all. Like I couldn't feel the warmth of a hot shower. I couldn't feel like, I never got chills from music. Music had no effect on me. Like nothing gave me a thrill. That was a huge cheat code for me because I was able to just focus on intellectual shit. Intellectual shit only. And even now, because like my relation or my like memories aren't tied with the emotional like connectivity or the emotional baggage that usually comes with those, I can reframe it every way I want. So that goes from something that's super negative that most people would be like Debbie Downers about, and me looking at me like, oh my God, this is huge. This has been such a cheat code, right? So I think that's the most important, is like realizing that you really can reframe all of your past experiences, and it's all just about the stories that you tell yourself. And then this idea of acquisition of meta skills is like every single thing that you do has something that you're getting out of it. Every single thing that you do, no matter how shitty it is, right? People will talk about like, yeah, I'm at this job and like this job sucks and I hate it. I'm not getting anything out of it. I'm like, well, take a step back, use that skill of pattern recognition and look at what skills you acquired from it. I attribute a lot of the skills that I have today through doing menial things that if I were to look back on them in a different light, I'd be like, I wasted so much time doing this. I wasted so much time in like the wrong industry. I wasted so much time working on the wrong project. No, I gained such invaluable and rare skills that then when I went and I pursued my more passionate endeavors, I was able to carry those over and have a unique competitive advantage that nobody else had. And I really train people to do that. It's like you have things that you've learned, you just need to go back and recite that and convince yourself that you learned those things.
One thing you talk about is the operator and strategist roles. Like there's two U's. How do you apply that to your own life, or how can people apply it to theirs?
Yeah, so humans are meant to be very self-sufficient, right? Sure, we had some interdependency from like a tribal standpoint, but not to the level that we are now. And society prioritizes specialization and rewards specialization because that makes you interdependent, right? You're codependent on the rest of the system. You are a cog in a machine. But in reality, and especially for entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, you have to wear a lot of hats. And adaptability and generalism is the one true skill that is going to enable you to get the most out of your business, to get the most out of your life, to get the most out of what you want. So in order to do that, you have to segment your mind. You have to essentially give yourself like borderline personality disorder light to understand that, hey, there's a lot of different versions of me. And each one of those versions is essentially a different employee that's working for me, the corporation. So the two primary ones for me are the operator and the strategist, right? The strategist is the one that's building out the game plan, the one that's thinking and looking over the horizon and seeing what hurdles and barriers are in your way, and then building game plans around it. The operator is the one that shows up, gets the work done, shuts up, does his work, and clocks out. So those are the two versions of me, but there's so many, and you can segment this up as much as you want and as much as you don't want. Like for me now, because I'm running so many projects, each project requires a different operator role. Like I have the creative, right? I have the video guy, I have the athlete, I have the writer, I have the researcher, I have the operator, I have the marketer, right? So I have all of these guys and I have the personality. And all of these guys, they clock in and they clock out. I bring them in when I need them. Sometimes some of them get more spotlight than others because they need more spotlight. But you also realize that there's certain activities that bring out certain versions of you. And there's certain times of the day where some version of you is more likely to be active than others. So then if you're taking that observer mindset, and if you're treating yourself like an science experiment by writing everything down, you can then start mapping it out and say, well, the writer seems to really like working in the morning. So I'm going to block off time for the writer to show up during that time, and all the operators, all the other guys, they're off, right? But midday, that's when the operator comes in. Mid-afternoon, athlete time, that's when he shows up. At night, that's the strategist and that's the creative. And you map that out, and now like you get into this circadian habit of when these guys show up, because each of these guys require a different cognitive headspace. They require different neurotransmitter activity as well, and they require different brain waves. Once you do that, then you can then compound that with like eating different food, right? Utilizing different nootropics and compounds to bring out that version of you. And now you have an entire team. So that's kind of what I've been able to do, and it's been really, really helpful. And it's enabled me to surpass what I could do just as Noah alone.
How strongly do you identify with, like, do you actually say to yourself, like, all right, I'm in operator mode now, like, that's the person I am, and you have all these, like, this mental architecture around it? Maybe to give you an example, when I was doing a bunch of sales stuff, in the past, I didn't like sales calls. I was nervous, not good at it. and I would stress out before, I'd just be nervous before sales calls. And then it's like, I built the alter ego, which wasn't defined by a name or anything, but it was like, I'm great at sales. Like, I'm the sales guy. I'm just gonna like jump on calls all day, like just tap into that and just reframe it. So how potent is that for you? Is it like very specific and delineated, or is it just more of a vibes thing?
When I first started, it was specific. Now, because I've been able to cultivate that, it's a vibes thing. But when I first started, it was so specific that I had specific areas and workspaces that each of these operators worked in, right? I had specific attire that they wore, right? When I was in operator mode, I wore shoes and I wouldn't allow myself to wear cotton shorts, and I'd force myself to wear a shirt. Right? I would go to a coffee shop for specific types of work. I had glasses that I wore only in certain operator modes. I had different playlists. So you need to delineate with cues. Cues are everything. Sensory input is what you tie your identity to the environment around you. That's why you, Sam, are probably a drastically different person when you're sitting in your office than you are when you're staying at your parents' house. Right? And you're probably drastically different there than you are at the gym, right? Because that environmental cue reminds you of the habits and behaviors that you enact in that space. So our identities are deeply tied to our environment. And that's why I spent like a few years just constantly traveling around. Because every time I get bad habits or I need to switch up, be like, all right, getting a new apartment. All right, moving to a new town.
Yeah, that's underrated. That's one question I was going to ask earlier, which I didn't, was like, how do you fundamentally shift everything at once, which is very hard to do. I think the only way to do it really is to change your environment drastically, which is not always possible. But if you can do it, I think you should, especially if you need to reset.
The best way to do it is to change as many variables as possible, right? Literally everything. Grab a giant whiteboard and lay out every single variable. New wardrobe, new style, new facial hair, new haircut, right? New activities, new hobbies, new routine, new environment, new social persona. Change all of these things. So like for me, it's like you go to a new city, you're a totally new person. Nobody knows who you are. You can completely reinvent yourself and nobody would know. You change up your hair. You change up everything about yourself. You change up the music you listen to. Change as many variables as possible. If your baseline is extremely foreign and uncomfortable, you know how easy it is to just slip in other uncomfortable things and other uncomfortable behavior? That's why people go and they're like, they go on vacation because everything's foreign. Now they get in the habit of reading, right? Like it's stuff like that, right? Like you're always like, oh, I picked up the habit while I was living in France. I picked up the habit while I was XYZ. I picked up the habit while I was working in XYZ. New environments offer new opportunities for new habits. And you have the option of whether those are going to be good habits or bad habits. And you better make damn sure that you're encoding good habits, especially for the first 1 to 3 weeks of a new environment. Now, how to do that in the light version on easy mode? Hair, right? Like haircut, facial hair, background on your phone, right? Changing up your workspace, moving the furniture around your house, new routine, right? You normally work from home, go to a coffee shop, right? You normally go to the gym at 4, go to the gym at 8 a.m. Switch all those things up. Switch the diet that you're eating, right? Switch everything. And like I even switch compounds that I'm taking. I go from like a cholinergic focus to a dopaminergic focus. And I go and I do all of these different things. But yeah, variable switching.
Couple more things I want to talk about, then we can wrap up. Pondermaxxing. I love this, man. What the hell is Pondermaxxing? Why should people do it?
You got to think that a majority of like intellectual time was spent just thinking before the advent of internet and before the hyperactive nature of modern world where everything's vying for attention. Generals had entire tents dedicated for just putzing around and thinking about their strategies all night. They had nothing else. They had no notifications going on. They had nobody distracting them. Every single academic had their study where they'd go and they'd just think and smoke their pipe, right? We spent so much time thinking. We spent time thinking just because that was the nature of doing anything. You'd sit in the car, maybe you'd have radio, but you wouldn't have like Spotify. You'd like go on a walk, you wouldn't have your phone, right? So you had no other option but to just sit and think. We don't have that anymore, right? It's completely gone. So we need to make time for that by Pondermaxxing. And it's this controversial or like this counterintuitive idea that the key to doing more is just scheduling in time to do nothing, getting comfortable with being bored and just sitting with your thoughts. Because like, there's that saying, and I love like the deeper you get into self-development, the more you realize that all these cliches are true. But a man, like the root of all man's problems is because he can't sit alone in a room for 30 minutes by himself. Right? Yeah, because they've got all of that baggage in their head. But if you learn to just sit with that baggage and you learn to tend to that mental inbox, your understanding of yourself, your understanding of the world, and your understanding of what you need to do to get where you want to be is going to be so much clearer. So I do that all the time. I mean, I really, like this morning, I spent like 30 minutes just walking around my pool. And I didn't even realize until I looked up. I'm like, oh, look at the time. Like, I got to get going. So you got to schedule time for it because no one's going to schedule time for you. Everything in this world is working against you having quality ponder time. What I do now is like before I go to bed, a lot of people like, oh, I can't sleep. My mind is racing. I look forward to that because that is me being able to check my mental inbox for like 30 minutes. I love it. I love when I can't go to sleep at night because it's just time for me to think. And we don't do that. We don't make a deliberate effort to schedule it. No one's going to tell you to make an effort to do less because they want you to be hyper productive. They want output, output, output. They want you on the clock 24/7. But in reality, if you're trying to be autonomous and live a life that you want to live, you need to ponder about it.
And if you feel like you can't or you don't have enough time, that means you absolutely should do it. Like that means you need it more than anyone else. Something George Mack talked about on the Chris Williamson podcast, where he talks about the busy trap. And he's like, if I feel I don't have 30 minutes to plan out my week or like think through things, probably means I need 2 hours.
How crazy is that? You know, and you know, I may be just like too far gone and too out of touch, but the idea that you don't have enough time is such like bullshit. You want to know why we're caught in this mindset? Because like you said with the busy trap, we've been trained to think that like output comes from just input, right? Like I see it a lot of times with guys that were athletes or guys that were like corporate guys, like really high level corporate guys that go into entrepreneurship. They don't think about efficiency. They don't think about 80-20. They just think about work, 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 work. So they're in the office for 12 hours a day, but then you go and you observe them in the office. They're not working 24/7. They're not working smart. They're just working hard. But then you got a guy who's been doing this their entire life, and their entire concept of work has been around like, what are the North Star metrics? What can I do now that's going to give me the majority of the results, right? And they're going to lap them every time on a fraction of the input.
Yeah, if you're working in like the industrial factory and you're doing like physical work, then efficiency counts. Or like just pure input output, like 1-to-1 ratio. But most of us and most people listening to this are doing knowledge work, some sort of creative work. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's not just about how hard you work. It's about what you work on. And if you can't take the time to like figure that out, figure out where the leverage points are, figure out what has the potential for like asymmetrical returns, it's just non-linearity. Like that's the world we live in. And if you're trying to fight it, you'll lose.
Yep, you said it. The word is leverage. You need to be leverage maxing. It's all about leverage. It's about getting the biggest bang for your buck. And then I think the next step with that is it's about doing the work that doesn't feel like work, that still gets crazy output. 90% of the work I do doesn't feel like work. So I genuinely probably feel like I work 1 hour, like 2 hours a week. All the rest, like I'm doing work, but it doesn't feel like it. And that's another huge cliche, I know, but
Yeah. I think that's actually quite hard for people to understand, especially if they've been like I was brought up, being taught the virtue of hard work, and it's important. Like hard work is important, but the way I interpreted that when I was young was like, if work's not hard, then it's not important, And I think a lot of people are stuck in that trap where they are doing it. Look, I can sit down and like. I can read for hours. I can write for hours. It like comes so naturally to me. And it's not until I talk to other people about it where they're like, dude, you wrote a 2,000 word essay in like 2 hours. That would take me 2 weeks. And it's like, that's hard for people. Like that's so weird. But for a long time, it was like, that's not really work. Like that's just a thing I do. It's hard for people to escape that sort of mentality where they constantly push themselves towards the hard work that doesn't have any leverage because they think it has to be hard. And if it's not hard, then they come away from it feeling like it's not really work.
Yeah, I see that too. And I guess, because I feel like I don't work very hard, but the reason I feel like I don't work very hard is because I just really enjoy doing everything that I love. And I was steadfast about leveraging career capital in the beginning to just be absolutely ruthless at removing anything that was redundant or unenjoyable to me. And looking and saying, what are the tasks that drain me? What are the tasks that energize me? Anything that drains me, my only objective is to automate, delegate, or abdicate this thing entirely. so that I can focus on the things that energize me, which then give me more energy to do it more. And it's same with like health and fitness, right? We have this idea that anything worth doing requires a certain level of masochism, right? That we have to give something up to do it, to like reap what we sow. But it's just so not true. It's so not true. Like we didn't evolve to hate what makes life good, right? It's hard, right? Otherwise everyone would do it, but it's not miserable.
Yeah, how do you reconcile this with the what we were talking about before with the pro-androgen lifestyle and like embracing competition and challenge? Like that stuff is hard. What is the difference between the masochist and the competition challenge enthusiast?
The masochist hates showing up. The masochist doesn't even want to go to the mats in the first place, right? The high T guy cannot wait. He's biting at the bit to go to class. And he's biting at the bit for those hard rounds that make you want to throw up. That's wrong. That's the difference. It's the mindset going into it.
What would you say to someone who's a lot of like advice on the internet, especially in the productivity space, is around avoiding burnout, working less, making more time for mindfulness, all these things. And I think that's important. There are a lot of people, and this was me for a long time, who don't have enough load, who don't have enough stress, who don't have enough on their plate, who aren't busy enough. Like, what would your advice be to those people? How can they get more tension in their lives?
Yep. I mess up with that too, right? Like I built the 4-hour work week. You hit what you aim at, right? So you only go as high as you aim. And I aimed to have like a really low workload, live a really, really cool life in a foreign country on the beach. And I did it. And then I realized that like, in order for me to become the best version of myself, I need pressure. And I need to do a lot of things. But when we think of that, we're like, oh, well, I need to just do more of what I'm already doing. So instead of writing 1 article a week, I'm going to write 5. But you're looking too like narrow at that. If you want to add more load and add more pressure and force yourself to become a better version of yourself, you gotta like differentiate there, right? Can you like spend more time with your family? Can you be there for your family? Can you like spend more time with your friends? Can you schedule in time for socializing? Can you acquire new hobbies and new skills, right? Can you start another side business, right? So it's about differentiating, because that's what's going to avoid burnout, because each one of those are a reprieve from the other ones, but they're all forcing you to be more like punctual. They're forcing you to be more dialed. And that's really been the secret for me. It's like, I don't need more of one problem. I need more of not problem, but project. I need more of a bunch of projects. And I had the same pitfall before, because I had a bunch of projects like, man, I am so dialed right now. What if I got rid of one of these projects or some of these projects and I just focused on one? And the second I did that, I fell back to that level I was before. Like my output wasn't as good, right? So people, especially people that have low stimulus to begin with, right? So ADHD people, you're going to perform better when your plate is full. I performed best in school when I was playing, like when it was season, like when I was in season for sports, especially when I had the season overlap, because I skied and I played lacrosse. So I'd still be doing dry run training for skiing, and I was playing lacrosse, and I was lifting, and I had school, and I was socializing. I got the best grades, I got the best performance across the board, and I felt the most alive, and I felt the best about myself.
It's so true, and it kind of cuts different to, I mean, there's so much like talk about just focus on one thing and one thing, like eliminate everything else, and it's like I get the point in theory, but it just hasn't worked for me ever. Like I can't just write something. I can't just like focus on, I don't know, this YouTube channel and that's all I do, and then I work for 3 hours a day, deep work, and then have nothing else on my plate. Like, what am I going to do? Go to the gym for an hour? Like, I need more, you know? And it's that whole thing around, if you want something done, you give it to a busy person. It's like, apply that to yourself. You're going to be so much more effective if your plate is full. To a certain point, it comes back to that golden, what did you call it before? Like that golden mean.
Golden window.
Yeah, the golden window. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's an intuitive thing too. I don't think a lot of people they're like, I have to do it this way. But some people just got to be like, hey, it's not for me. Funny enough, I went through a pretty big party phase when I was able to actually feel enjoyment again, because I was living on a beach in Mexico, and I had the most growth from a business standpoint and also from a content standpoint in that period when I was going out 4 times a week, because I was so busy with going out and socializing and partying that I woke up in the morning I got to get this shit done. I was in my best shape. I was like the best performing when it came to content and everything, and I was enjoying life the most. And then I was like, no, I gotta tone it down. Like I gotta stop doing that. I need to focus on work. Performance plummeted.
Interesting. Maybe I need to do that more.
Good for it. It's not good for you, but it's
Yeah,
good
yeah,
to
yeah.
keep things going, you know?
Yeah, that is fascinating. All right, one more thing I want to talk about. We'll wrap this up. Is hyperlearning. What is that?
Yeah, yeah, that's funny. The YouTube video I just posted. But, I think a lot of us, especially as we get busy, we have so many things that we want to learn. And I see all those books back there. There's so many books that you could read.
Yeah, I
There's
haven't
so
read.
many
I've read like
topics.
hardly any of them, man.
Yeah, exactly. Books are for looks for me at this point. Like you said, most books can be blog posts. But there's so many things that you want to learn. There's so many like topics that you want to just pursue, and there's so many like articles and pieces of content that you want to read. But what ends up happening is because you feel like oftentimes the browsing section, like the browsing component of things, it's like a result of you procrastinating. So you don't feel like you have enough time to actually do it, but you're going to save it for a later time. That later time never comes. All that happens is you start getting stockpiles of information that you want to learn. But the more that it piles up, the harder you're going to have a time ever chipping away at it, let alone picking one to choose. Because the paradox of choice is real. Having less options is better than having none. That's why rates of marriage are way higher when like the option pool is much smaller. Because you don't feel like you're missing out on things. When there's only 2 houses on the market, you're not going to have as much buyer's remorse when there's 5. So the solution to this is to, if you come across something that you want to read or you want to learn about, learn it right now. Like right now, like, because I did this with Twitter threads. I was like, I'm going to read this one day. Never did. So
Oh,
now it's like,
dude, you should see my bookmarks. It's
yeah,
bad. I never go back.
bookmarking. That video that I posted was like a 50-second video. I'm like, no more bookmarks. Read now. And it got like 1,500 bookmarks. I'm like, guys, you're missing the point here. But that's kind of like just a trigger fire decision to like, if you don't know something, look it up right now. Like, I don't like not knowing what words mean. I don't like not knowing something, so I look it up immediately. When I was learning Spanish, I would literally just be walking around Mexico and I'd think of something in English. I'm like, I don't know how to say this in Spanish. Let me look it up. Immediately look it up. That's how I was able to learn Spanish fluently without ever using Duolingo. So do this. Always have something that you're coming back to at any given moment, like a book on hand, where it's like, if I have free time, this is going to be my default action. If I have free time, I have one topic that I'm learning about. And then everything else, I'm just going to do immediately.
I love that. I love that. That's something that I've like kind of instinctively done, but then the rational part of me was like, yeah, you can't do it like this. You're not supposed. You need to be more structured and orderly. And it's like, no, just like what you said at the start of the episode to bring it full circle. You just need to let it rip.
You got to let it rip. Exactly. It's more de-learning than it is relearning. Like you're just de-learning these bad rational habits that you've made. The best part about all this, Sam, is how much more enjoyable it makes life. Like, you know how much more enjoyable it is when you're not overthinking everything and you're just doing? Everything's better. Like everything that I wanted was on the other side of just letting it rip.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you don't know how good it is until you do it.
Exactly. You don't know how fast a Ferrari is when you've been driving a Camry for the last 40 years until you get in one and you can't go back.
That's so true. No, thanks so much for coming on. This has been a blast. Before we end this, where can people find you online? Where can people learn more about you?
Yeah, I write a lot for my newsletter now. That's where like most of my in-depth stuff is. So www.noahryan.co. All social media platforms, Noah Ryan Co. Mainly Twitter is where I post a lot of stuff. I post on Instagram a lot too, just of lifestyle stuff. But yeah, find me anywhere on there.